everybody. Thanks, Jameson, for letting us know that we were live. We're so glad to be here. Our final session of the day. It has been an incredible day, at least for me. I learned a lot. I was inspired. Just loved our last session and super excited for our final session today. So welcome. We have Eammon Store from FairShare back with us, hosting a conversation with Nate Mook, who is CEO of World Central Kitchen and a friend who I just have admired his career for years. Really excited to have him with us today to wrap up the day. World Central Kitchen has been doing incredible work around the world, and we'll hear more directly from him and from Eammon. But first, I'm going to share a video with everybody so we can hear a little bit more about World Central Kitchen's work, and I'll pass it to Eammon. So.
And we all need to mute for this vid.
Yes. Here we go. I feel like that encapsulates our whole day. Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Nate, for joining us. And Eammon, I'm going to pass it to you and let you all have a conversation. Thank you.
Thanks, Amy and Nate. So great to have you to sort of close us out this afternoon with the end of this another brilliant Sun Valley marathon of an afternoon. Now, I want to start from a place really talking a bit about you, because even though I've worked in the space of food security and communities for at least 3 years now, and my kind of experience of World Central Kitchen has really been through the COVID period. And I do want to talk about that because I think it's obviously hugely relevant to what we talked about, but I don't want to lose sight of actually the decade that World Central Kitchen's been going and the mission it was on before the huge pivot that everyone else has been through. But also, your own background's not from this space, right? You weren't in necessarily the food industry and the non-profit world. Like, how did that magic start? The video is a bit of a clue, I suspect, but how did the quality of that video, by the way, is brilliant. But how did your mission start with this?
Yeah, it's interesting because my own journey and I think the organization's journey were kind of intertwined in a way. So I, my original background was in the tech world, was in the startup world, around the turn of the century and the dot-com boom, got into the tech scene and started working on software companies and the internet and all of this. And, at some point I sort of felt like I was living in a bit of a bubble of the tech world and wanted something to do something different, to do something, completely, shifting my environment, and that took me on a bit of a journey that I started working with this organization called TED, and that created TED Talks. You might be familiar with it, and they were launching a program called TEDx, and TEDx was taking the TED conference and taking it all around the world. So in the beginning of this, helping launch TEDx and working with communities all around the globe, really kind of shifted the trajectory of my life. I was all of a sudden, being connected to all these amazing, change makers and entrepreneurs and ideas coming from all corners of the globe. And, I love the idea of this platform of TED to kind of tell these stories, to get them out into the world. And it was during this time that I met a chef named José Andrés, and Chef José was based in DC and had a number of restaurants and was just beginning, kind of his own journey on, how he could bring to bear his experience and expertise to some of the big global challenges around food that the world was facing. And sort of through this serendipitous moment, crossed paths as Jose was getting World Central Kitchen off the ground, and we sort of connected, and I had sort of been working with him in some fashion ever since. And just to give some quick background on the organization, because like you said, I think people have maybe heard of World Central Kitchen or José Andrés in certain capacities, but the organization goes back to 2010, after the big earthquake hit Haiti. in Port-au-Prince, devastated the country. Jose at the time was actually it was in the Caribbean on another island at an event with another chef named Eric Ripert and Anthony Bourdain, who most of you probably have heard of. And in watching this tragedy unfold in Haiti, and Jose had a moment where he really realized that here he was cooking for the few, and he wanted to be cooking for the many. And it sort of sparked this drive in him to see how he could take the resources and the expertise and the experience that he has and put it to bear on these other issues. And a few weeks later, he was on the ground in Haiti, starting to learn and listen. And, I don't think he had any intention of starting a nonprofit right away, but as he started to see these gaps, he started to see where somebody like him who really understood food and culture and the interconnectedness of all of these things, was the knowledge that he had was not being executed on the ground. And that's sort of how everything all began. One project at a time. He started working with local farmers in Haiti. He built a social enterprise, a bakery in an orphanage, working with Paul Farmer, and it was sort of slowly building up. And over the years, really Jose started to learn and slowly grow the organization, and everything changed. There was a big sort of pivot, the first pivot, when Hurricane Maria hit Puerto Rico, and Jose and I landed on the ground in Puerto Rico in 2017. And we realized that nobody was in charge of feeding an island. There was no electricity, there was no communications, the grocery stores were closed, the banks were closed, and our federal government had no way to support those families on the ground. And as Jose says, we just started cooking, and it became a model that we took from Puerto Rico, and we've now deployed all over the world. And now we found ourselves in a completely new environment with the pandemic. And that's kind of how we ended up here today. And my journey, when I hit the ground in Puerto Rico with Jose, I was a friend of his. We had worked on a documentary together about Haiti, telling the story of this incredible place, incredible island, and the food and the history and the culture. But I was a friend of Jose's. I didn't work for the organization at the time, but I found myself in a situation to pull from my background as an entrepreneur, as a storyteller, and somebody who had been sort of immersed in a lot of these global issues around international development and a humanitarian response over the past many years. And so it just sort of all came together in this moment. And Jose said, we built something here that I want to continue to grow, and would you take the reins and run with it? And we've done that. We've done that ever since. And it's been a bit of an incredible journey.
And I guess, in most of the coverage you see in traditional media, that disaster relief, you see like the medicine and the health and the infrastructure. And I can't really think I don't really recall how much you actually see about what you're talking about is about how communities continue to nourish themselves and help themselves. So I found that super interesting, like in following the story. But it's also, there's a kind of quite a significant step then from the immediacy of how you help communities, how you empower communities to prevail, to like the longer term programs you've built in those countries. Like there's now like a system of like different programs, whether it's clean kitchen, sink to stove, plow to plate, which is now like more of a like actually building like food infrastructure into those communities and learning.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I think that really underpins the work. I think that, very early on, Jose saw that there was a lot of outside solutions that were coming in to solve problems. And they weren't really listening to those on the ground. And in the very beginning of the execution of World Central Kitchen, Jose had a moment. He was that he talks about because it resonated with him so strongly. He was in Haiti. He was in a camp for displaced families that had, their homes had been destroyed, their community collapsed, and he was cooking and he was making beans for this community. And a group of women came over to him and they said, "Look, Jose, we love that you're here supporting and bringing resources in, but you're not cooking the beans properly." And, this is a moment where I think, a lot of celebrity chefs or people might be like, "What are you telling me what to do? Like, I'm a chef. Like, what do you?" But no, as they said, "Yeah, you're right. Like, this is your culture. This is your country. Show me. Let me learn from you." And the women, in Haiti, they love puree. They love the beans pureed. So they got a sack of rice and they put the beans through the sack and created this beautiful, puree of black beans. And, it was a moment, I think that's humbling, right? That you don't have all the answers, that you just can't come in and say, "I know what's best for you." And I think that's really been at the core of all of our work, even our humanitarian and disaster response work. I think what has made World Central Kitchen so effective in the past few years with our work, whether it's, in situations like Puerto Rico or wildfires in California or volcanoes in Guatemala, or most last year with Category 5 Hurricane Dorian in the Bahamas, is, it's not parachuting in and saying, "All right, we've got all this stuff and we're here to help you and this is what it is." It's, okay, what are the resources on the ground that we can activate? What's the local knowledge? Where are the local chefs? Where are the restaurants, the food trucks, the infrastructure that's already there, the local producers, the farmers that are already on the ground that we can get food from? We had a moment in Puerto Rico early on where FEMA was struggling to get things onto the island. They were trying to bring bread in from Miami, put it on a ship, get it into Puerto Rico. The port was damaged. There was all this backlog in the port. They couldn't get bread to Puerto Rico. And we said, "Why on earth are you bringing bread from Miami to Puerto Rico? How about we give the bakeries the fuel that they need to set up generators, and then they could bake the bread right there in Puerto Rico on the island," right? And it's these types of like very simple solutions. But if you don't have that mindset, it's sometimes very difficult to do so. And so, I think as we both respond to the emergency part of the crisis, which is let's get on the ground, support, leverage what's there, work with those that know, tap into those existing resources to get food to those that need it most. But how can we also make sure that we're leaving the food ecosystem stronger than when we got there? In Puerto Rico, we learned very early on that Puerto Rico was importing about 85% of its food before Hurricane Maria hit. We see similar issues in other Caribbean islands, in the Bahamas, that are so reliant on imports that when the system starts to break down, then access to food goes away. So we looked at how can we invest into the future? How can we invest into food security? So we've now put close to $2 million into local food businesses in Puerto Rico. We're now expanding that program into the Bahamas, the US Virgin Islands. And it's a model that we think, can really spread widely. It's about building resilience in the local community so that in the future, they can really start to respond themselves if and when climate disasters happen.
I can see in the comments, I can see the chefs are loving it. I think it's like that example of bread coming from Miami is a good example of I think chefs just have a natural common sense that maybe some of us have it like drilled out of us. So 10 years in the making, pretty solid infrastructure and development plan, and then we hit 2020 and just share with us, like, obviously COVID hits and you do like the mother of all pivots in the US. The numbers are staggering to me, like for any organization. So maybe you can start with the numbers of where you're at, and then I'd love to hear the journey of the speed of how that happened.
Yeah, so we've now served over 25 million fresh meals in response to the pandemic since March here in the United States. We've also been working in Spain. We continue to work down in Colombia and Venezuela. We're working in Indonesia. So where we could and where we had an ability to respond, we were doing that. But here in the United States, we're working in over 35 states right now. We have folks on the ground in hundreds of cities. We've been able to activate a network of restaurants, of over 2,500 restaurants now that are serving meals. And what's I think also so incredible about the work that our team has been able to do, and it's not just me, it's not Jose, it's all the amazing team members that we have as part of the organization, is that you're not just providing meals, but you're doing it in the middle of a health crisis. So meals have to be individually packaged. The preparation of the meals has to be safe and secure. You can't just set up a site where you're feeding thousands of people at once. You have to worry about the last mile delivery, which is so complicated. And so it's the logistics, I think, that has been really, completely new to us. And we've been having to really, you have to figure it out as you fly, you adapt. I mean, we're an organization that has to constantly adapt, but this has certainly been, I think, the biggest adaptation we've had to respond with.
Yeah, and people talk about building the plane as you're flying it, but you're a super tanker that's like changing. Like, where do the restaurants come from? How did you get the quality and the authenticity of the work, even in that sense, like just finding the right partners?
Yeah, so very early on, we realized that this was going to be a bit of a different type of disaster, right? We didn't know what was going to happen in the months ahead, but we knew that this was a disaster that was impacting every corner of our country, from the big cities to the small towns. We knew that World Central Kitchen itself couldn't be everywhere. Our traditional model of setting up a kitchen and cooking a lot of food and distributing it out wasn't going to work because we couldn't be everywhere all at once. Also, just more generally, our country is not built to respond to disasters that are not in a singular place, right? What we're good at is, okay, a hurricane hits, Florida, and we put all these resources in and we bring in all this stuff and we respond in Florida. But how do you do that when the disaster is everywhere? And so as we started to look at how we were going to approach this, very quickly it was obvious to us that there was a really smart solution. We had restaurants that were not being able to open because of the health crisis, potentially going to go out of business forever. And this is still a major problem. And yet, at the same time, in the communities, you have folks that are not able to put food on the table for their families. Folks have lost jobs. The food system itself, schools have been closed, and families haven't been able to go get meals as they traditionally would. And so on one hand, you've got a group of people that are hunger to cook for others. And then you've got a group of people that really need access to food. And so we said, well, why don't we connect those two things? Instead of us doing the cooking, let's put the restaurants back to work. We will pay the restaurants to produce the meals. And then we'll serve as a bit of like an air traffic controller to work on getting the meals from the restaurants to those that need it most. And it was, for us, it was like the light bulb went off and we said, this is how we can be everywhere. There's a restaurant in every town, every community. And not only that, they know their communities. And so it was actually, once word started to spread, once we started to identify the local partners on the ground, it was really easy to start to get connected to other restaurants. And the culinary industry, chefs, they know each other and they say, oh yeah, I've got this restaurant over here and this chef over here. And oh yeah, this restaurant serves this community, so we could really be hyper local, right? So from cuisines to just general local knowledge, we could tap into those restaurants that were really right there in those neighborhoods, which is so critical. And so for us, that was really, it was just a no-brainer. And, it was more expensive than, of course, it would normally cost to do this work, because now all of a sudden you're paying somebody else to do it versus, if we were activating our own kitchens and buying our own food. But every dollar that we're putting into this is going to have this multitude of impact, because the dollar is going to not only go to the restaurant to keep the lights on and the rent paid, it's going to keep the employees with a job, which is going to make sure that they can afford food for their families. That restaurant is going to continue to buy from the local farmers, the suppliers, which, is going to keep them employed, and you have the food that is going to reach the families that are really struggling right now because of this crisis. And so for us, it was worth it. It was because every dollar that we would invest in this response is going to touch so many different folks in the process.
And that community that you're keeping at work is the most endangered, if you like, or it's the least supported, whether it's like the immigrant community or the service industry in general. Like, they're the ones that kind of fall through the cracks first, if you like, and it's a pretty sizable industry. Are you able to measure that in any way? Do you know how many people are working as a consequence of this?
So it's something that we're pulling together now. We do know that, we saw early on that in March and April, the majority of the job losses were from the food and beverage sector. Yeah. We were also seeing, all of us, I think we're seeing the images of farmers not being able to sell their crops and seeing the impact that was having. We've now seen, with the 2,500 restaurants that we are working with now, on average, each restaurant has been able to retain or continue to employ 3 to 5 individuals that would no longer have had their jobs. And many restaurants have told us that they wouldn't have even been able to stay in business. They wouldn't have been able to make rent payments. They would have, probably just shut down entirely and closed down their business. And so we're already seeing, both anecdotally from the stories that we're hearing back, and quantitatively the numbers of staff that they've been able to retain and keep hired and keep paying a living wage to, right? And again, that's so critical because, as you said, right now, this industry is the most marginalized and vulnerable in the first place. Yeah. We've also been able to do things like in California, with support from a donor. We've been able to set up and support getting meals out to the farm workers. So every week we have multiple distributions throughout Central California, working with local restaurants that prepare meals, and then those meals get distributed to the families of all of the farm workers. Because, as you said, these are some of the most essential workers in our economy, and yet are often those that are completely ignored. And so for us, it was really critical to focus on this group. And again, I think it's been, it's a new approach for us. We haven't taken this approach before, where we've, worked with so many others to do the cooking, but I think it's one that we've now seen the power. This is what chefs live for. They live to cook for others, and for restaurants to be able to serve their own communities and be able to be supported in the process, for us is just, is a no-brainer. And now what we need to do is now we need to get our federal government involved. We need to get the federal government to be able to come in and support, because it's very clear now that this crisis is not going to go away next week or next month. We're looking at months ahead, and it's going to be critical for us to be able to continue this work.
Well, you have the power on both sides. You have the chef community, which is such a connected community in terms of how you can get things mobilized fast. But then you've now got clout on the other side. Is how much money have you raised through COVID? Like 60 million or something?
Yeah, so we've deployed already about $80 million directly into the hands of small restaurants. And then in total now we've spent, including some of our other feeding operations and working with schools, we've now spent well over $100 million that directly into food. So, this is, and unfortunately, we're not seeing a huge drop in demand. In fact, it's only increasing in a lot of places. Come visit some of our feeding operations in our distribution points in Queens, for example, in New York, and you'll meet families who stand in line for hours every single day. And so, really, it's heartbreaking, and it's just a sign that what we're doing is, yes, on paper it looks like we're doing a lot. On the other hand, it's we need to do so much more.
Yeah, and as you think about, at the moment, amazing statistics, the scale and the sort of virality of what you're able to do, but obviously reliant on donations of all different shapes and sizes. As we've looked at like the impact of COVID on the restaurant industry that I think was already for many a broken model, the cracks, sort of creaking supply chain in American food. But so some challenges in the supply chain and the restaurant industry, some interesting brighter side of like families eating together, local food becoming more important, communities coming back, around building of community. Like, what does the future look like? What's a sustainable future look like?
So, I'm optimistic. I think that for all of the, what we've gone through, which is a lot, and, we're not through it yet, and there's still a lot of work to do. But I'm optimistic because I think that there can be good progress that comes out of this. COVID has, shown a spotlight on the cracks in the system. I think before COVID, probably a lot of people didn't think about schools as places that feed their communities, right? People thought of schools as places where kids go to get educated, not where kids go to get fed. And this is this has been a harsh reminder of that we relied on schools to feed our communities. I think we've seen now the dysfunction in the supply chain. When on one hand, you have farmers plowing under their crops or dumping out their milk. And on the other hand, you have families in line at food banks trying to get food. So why can't we make those connections? So I think what's happening now is that we're starting to think about this a little bit more comprehensively. We're starting to look at, where are the failures? Where are those cracks that we can start to repair? What are the logistics improvements we need to make? What are the, how do we make sure that farmers who have excess can be connected to where there's need? How can we leverage the federal government and its resources to make sure that, especially during times of crisis, that food doesn't go to waste while people are hungry? And how can we look at restaurants as solutions, right? I mean, I think this is a bit novel. It's not something that necessarily has been done before at scale, but it's clear that restaurants can be part of a solution. And so, again, leveraging what's already there in communities to create a response. So I think all of these ideas are being talked about now, which is good. And there's a lot of work to do. We need to do more than talk. We need to act. But I know that organizations like Feeding America, the network of food banks, are starting to look at how they can improve their logistics networks. World Central Kitchen, we're really exploring how we can use technology to work with local farmers and identify excess and purchase excess crops and get those to families who need them most. We're partnering with school districts to really identify how we can improve the way and support them in the process of feeding students, and there are innovative solutions that can come out of that. And so I think that there's a lot of work to do, but I'm actually really optimistic that perhaps this could be a moment where we sort of wake up a little bit, right? We recognize how we're eating, what we're eating. I think what is most important, I should have mentioned this before, is that in all disasters, the communities that are hit hardest are the ones that are already vulnerable to begin with, right? The food deserts that don't have grocery stores, the folks that don't have access to fresh produce or, farmers markets or things like this. These are the communities that are always the most impacted. And so again, COVID has really shown a spotlight on where those areas are, and can we start to mobilize, come up with solutions to food deserts and access to healthy foods. Make sure that nutrition is at the core and central part of the conversation. So again, all of these issues are now coming to the fore, and I think that we have to keep the pressure up. There's a big election coming up in November. A lot of members of Congress and we have the presidential election. And so I think as we look at this, what changes do we need to make in the system? One of them I'll throw out there is, right now we have a Secretary of Agriculture. We do not have a Secretary of Food, right? So how can we start to shift our thinking? Maybe we need a Secretary of Food that has a 360-degree view on things and not just focused on agriculture.
Yeah. And, apparently there's an election coming up at some point soon. But more importantly, COVID isn't going away. Like the these issues are going to stay with us for some time, right? As communities build, so that's not going to. We've got months or maybe years ahead of us as we rebuild like resilience. Looks like we might be going into one of the busier hurricane seasons as well. How far can you be stretched, or is this something that actually has to be handed over to focus? Or I can't even begin to think, with the amount of energy you've had to pivot to extend here, like what happens if something happens back over here in 2 months' time?
It's a great question, and it's one that our teams have really been looking at. I'll say that, we're, in many ways, I actually think we're more prepared right now for a busy hurricane season, which it already is. Hurricane Hannah, and we have another storm on the way to Puerto Rico. I think the mobilization and what we've had to build for this COVID response has been so comprehensive that it will enable us to be ready to respond to another big climate disaster like a hurricane. There's some complexity to work out, such as issues of moving individuals. But I also think that we've been able to build such local, strong networks on the ground that in many ways, those communities now are prepared themselves to respond, even if they aren't having outside support coming in, right? So in places like Puerto Rico, we have an extensive local network on the ground that is ready to go. So if this storm, this new one on the way, Tropical Cyclone 9 is going to hit, they've already begun mobilizing, preparing, getting things set to go. We've got this incredible network of restaurants across the United States, across Florida and Texas and Louisiana, and our teams that have been working in places like New Orleans. And so it's definitely going to be a lot to take on, but I also think that in many ways, we're in some ways more prepared now because of what we've had to build to respond to COVID. So really, you don't have a choice, right? I mean, the storms are coming, the climate is changing, and we have to be ready, and we have to be able to support those that don't have access. And we have to start thinking about long-term solutions, investing into those communities, and figuring out how we can build food security from the local level up, not coming up with solutions that are coming in from the top down. And so that's all part of the process. It's going to take time, but I think as we're thinking about these issues, that has to remain a priority. Yeah.
And I feel like, obviously this has put you on a global stage. The work you were doing was already recognized for those that follow it in disaster recovery and stuff like that. You've got an army of chefs here. Carolina Santos Neves is a chef, Mark Brand, the same. These are people who are embedded in the community, but I think also what you do is you've given power to chefs and recognition that food, reminding people that food sits at the heart of community and at local community. And I do want to just shout out that it's sweet that Zach got married in Sun Valley, saw a flyer, and is here on the conference, just tuned in. So Zach, congratulations on getting married in Sun Valley. There's no better place I could think of. But from my perspective, it's an honor to Nate to have the time to spend with you. It's been a privilege to close it out with this session. We got a couple of questions in, so my apologies for those that had more to follow. If people need to get hold of you, what's the best way for those?
The best way is shoot me an email. I'm just Nate, Nate, at wck.org. Definitely follow our work on the website. We're pretty active on social media as well. I mean, we're big believers in transparency. Jose talks about radical transparency all the time. We want to know that everybody who's given us $5 to $25 to $10,000, they're going to know exactly what we're doing on the ground in real time and know what's going on. So it's the best way to keep an eye on what's going on and also how to get involved. Like you said, I mean, we really see World Central Kitchen as a platform. Chefs are a key component, but others as well. I mean, you don't have to be a chef to get involved. And this is such critical work, and it's only going to become more critical as our food systems become more vulnerable with the changes that we're seeing in climate, disasters, and now certainly with COVID that is not going away. And so, the more support we can build, the better. So join us, get in touch, and we'd love to have you on our team.
Thank you, Nate. Good luck with the season ahead. Amy, thank you for the...
I just wanted to say a couple words. Thank you both so much. I know we ran over a bit, so thank you, Nate, for being willing to share a little bit more for a few more minutes. It was an incredible way to end our day. Concrete impact at scale. Just want to help grow it even more, and love the connection that you all see, the honoring of the locality, growing from the local to the global. Speaking the language of Sun Valley Institute, I would just share one COVID food story where we had potato growers who had nowhere to send their potatoes. And so they started dumping them in our South Valley so people could just come and get them for free. And so we had a little mini logistical, and then social media would go up and say, all right, we've got a new one. And then people actually brought their trucks down there, loaded up their trucks, and brought them up into our valley where people needed the food. And so it, a little emergency logistical operation through social media, thankfully, and a generous farmer who wanted to make sure it didn't just get plowed under. But those types of challenges, and we're working on every day, local storage, local processing, right? All of those infrastructure, local distribution, all those challenges that need to be met to support more resilient food system, which we saw absolutely was not during COVID. And so thank you for all you're doing to support communities in those urgent times of crisis, but also to help build those resilient food systems through the Plow to Plate program. And Eammon, thank you as always for supporting the forum and helping us to have these incredible conversations. And just one last reminder, everybody, you can find the organizations on the links we've been putting in and on the website, the Run the World website. We have that cause QR code, and you can just go to that cause website and follow all the nonprofits we featured today and support them, get involved. And we hope to see everyone on Thursday. Final word. So Thursday, little shorter day. Fantastic agenda starting out with our keynote speaker, Peter Seligman from Neotero, and talking about Indigenous guardianship. And we're rebalancing the human relationship with nature all day Thursday. So really building off of this conversation. So thank you, everyone. Have a wonderful evening. And if you want to, join us in the cocktail hour and get set up one-on-one and meet some folks, perhaps over your own beverage. And thank you again to everyone for a great day.